well, thank you all for coming. I'm Wasim, I'm the CEO of Pilot. I'm moderating our session today here with my good friend Aston Motes.
I'm Aston, Director of Engineering at United Masters. We are a music tech company. We help artists put their music out to the world.
How about before that, Aston? What were you doing before that?
Before that, I was working on a number of failed startups.
I think a lot of us have been there. And then before that, where were you?
Before that, I was at Dropbox. I was the first employee, first engineer, first hire, somewhere around there.
Both.
Okay, well, there are people. But yeah, I'll take that. First engineer at Dropbox.
I like to say first employee.
All right.
I'm not trying to contravene the historical record, but I always say.
I'll take it. It's cool.
And so, look, I think our feeling today is we want to keep this very casual, very informational. So to the extent that you folks have questions, please don't be shy about jumping in. Aston and I think, kind of outlined a couple topics that we're interested in talking about, but look, it's only useful if it's useful to you all. So please, let's keep it interactive. I think one thing that I'd be interested in hearing about, Aston, is just the path in brief. Just take us from the top. How did you get here? You can start as early as you want to start.
Yes, born in South Carolina. In South Carolina, entrepreneurship is very different than here, so I didn't know what this thing was. My dad had always small business owner, and so that means you run on your own money, or you take out loans from the bank, or maybe a mortgage, second mortgage on your home, and that's your funding. But I did always love this idea of owning a company, or running a company, or kind of being, I guess, the person whose thing it is. Also, as a kid, I used to just program a lot. And so by high school, I was pretty sure what I wanted to do was be a software engineer, with the eventual hope of starting a company, but not necessarily a software company. I don't think I had that understanding that early in life. Ended up going to MIT, where we met, sort of. And then where also I met a bunch of other people who were kind of entrepreneurial. And I guess the kind of magical moment at MIT, there was a kid who I happened to be TAing for this kind of standard class in course 6, which is MIT's computer science major, and just doing super, super excellent in the class, and then disappeared kind of mid-semester, and the professor asked about him, and I and another friend of mine who were both TAing together, we've known this kid for years, and we're oh yeah, he's probably not coming back. Maybe next semester, but he's off working at this startup. It's called Dropbox. It's not a real thing yet, but he'll be back eventually. And so that kid was Arash, and essentially, there's a lot of little story in between, but Arash ended up being the co-founder of Dropbox with Drew, and they moved out here to raise money, and eventually recruited me out here to be first employee. So that's a lot of biography.
Sure.
I'll stop there, and then we can dig into other pieces.
Yeah, I'm curious, sort of you mentioned that when you got to MIT, you had a sense that you wanted to do a company of some kind. How did that end up crystallizing, or sort of was there anything at MIT where you're oh, this is now really interesting to me, or oh, this was not quite what I thought it was going to be?
Yeah, I mean, I was I was one of those early acolytes of Paul Graham, I think that's fair to say.
Sure.
Saw him talk and was just fascinated by this idea that people my age could not only start a company or have an idea that they worked on, a project, but could actually find someone to give them hundreds of thousands of dollars. That was insane to me at the time, that I could take a summer off and they would give us $18,000.
Staggering amount of money.
It was a lot of money actually. It was more than most internship programs were paying. Although you had to split it 2 or 3 ways if you had co-founders or whatever. But still, it was pretty awesome. And I really and truly believed in this that core thing that Paul Graham was talking about, which was, I frame it now, the language I use now is a pipeline issue, which is there are all these people qualified to start these businesses who are not starting these businesses, in part because they just don't know that they can. And so I really bought into that. And so I think the Paul Graham talk I went to was probably sophomore year. So between sophomore year and senior year, I was dead set on, I really, really want to start a startup. And then I still had not talked myself, into believing that I could do it right out of school. So I didn't have that much confidence. And I also didn't have any ideas whatsoever. ended up applying to YC with no idea. And that didn't work the first time, but did work the second time, post Dropbox. And to this day, maybe I still don't have any ideas. But yeah, basically, like that was the kind of the thing that kind of spurred it was really listening to Paul Graham, reading all of his essays, eventually getting to meet him, getting to meet Jessica, and being like, wow, like I'm this close to like being able to actually start something.
And I want to actually probe into like the kind of like start something versus join something question at some point, because I think you have some interesting insights there. But after MIT, you did in fact join a startup.
I did.
But it wasn't Dropbox.
That's correct. Very correct. So the extra context on the applying to YC was I had applied with no idea, and I already had a job lined up, which made it pretty difficult for YC to believe that I would like actually be committed to this startup thing. But the job was because, like I said before, I didn't really like believe that I could start something, and so I kind of shopped around for a few startup-y, smaller company things to do. I also chose New York because I thought New York would be cool.
Which it is, that's accurate.
Very cool. And I ended up at OkCupid, which now you guys kind of think of as maybe like the fourth best dating site on mobile. But it was at the time, it was like revolutionary because it was the first mobile site to say we're not going to charge. So it's like totally ad supported and super, well, I guess like extremely online would be the phrase we would use now, but it's like built for these people who had only ever interacted with other people mediated by like digital technology. And it was just a crazy thing culturally in New York. Like it was a small site, but culturally like really, really relevant. So like there was this one guy at the office who he had just joined, another engineer, just joined and was gonna go out on a date on the weekend. And someone asked, oh, where are you going out? And it's like somewhere in Brooklyn. And they're like, is it with Peggy? It's like, apparently this one woman had been matched with every OkCupid engineer. Because it's just like, you know, the match score just like worked the way that it worked, and OkCupid's hiring process worked the way that it worked. You know? It's just like very consistent. And so, yeah, like it was like a real thing. It was a startup as well. Like the founder had done the GSB thing and had raised money from people who were like in Silicon Valley, but in New York. And the part of this story, I'm leaving out tons of interesting intersections, but this is worthwhile intersection for sure is the same time I started OkCupid, Wasim started.
That's true, I was an intern.
Yeah, so it's really weird you say it as intern though, because like we were the same class year, but you like knew that you were not going to stay in the work world. And I was convinced that I was. And that was the only difference. I think we came in on the exact same day, working on very similar projects. And then at the end of the summer, Wasim just like waved goodbye.
Well, because I knew I was going to go back and do that Meng.
Yeah.
And you had decided that you were not going to.
Yes, I had decided that the Image is the MIT's master's, one-year master's program, and I decided that that 1 year was going to like ruin my entire startup career.
Sure. Well, I mean, you were probably right in retrospect. not wrong. And then actually before that, we had interned at Google together.
Yeah, we interned. Yeah, and had some great memories in 2006 of just. I think 2006 was when the startup scene started like reviving itself. Yeah. Like it died post 2000, and like 04, 05 it was kind of beginning, and then the summer of 06, like we went to some party for a startup that was just like a pool party, and it felt so extravagant. And you know, a year later, I'm like, oh, I guess that wasn't that extravagant, but it was like super extravagant for the time.
Well, also like for me anyway, it was the first time I was in California, and like the weather was nice. It was just like it was like the Silicon Valley dream. This was in Mountain View too. It was just like, wow.
And there was a really big contrast. Like working at Google, even as an intern, you kind of get it's a big company, so you like see how big company it feels. And then we were meeting people who were working at like Meebo, which was like a nice chat app, and like the office was so cool. Right. And like people who were like just starting out of Stanford were starting their own companies. Like, man, like what I told myself was, if I ever come back to Silicon Valley, I got to come back and do what they're doing and not do the Google thing.
So you were at OkCupid, and then you left.
Yeah, so Jeroen Arash had raised money. They did YC that summer. They had raised money after they moved to Silicon Valley. Weirdly, this is not very weird, maybe, but weirdly, in retrospect, no one in Boston was at all interested in investing in Dropbox. Very conservative culture there. They're looking for like biotech stuff, and you know, there's more traditional hardware things that felt like real. And Dropbox felt very ephemeral and fake. And so they weren't able to raise money there, but they were able to raise money here. And after they raised money, they were like looking to pay somebody. And so, yeah, there was a very long process for them. I guess kind of long process for me in terms of like, yes, I love like you guys. I think you're awesome. I would enjoy working on this, I guess, but I have a job. Like it's they already pay me. Like I don't know like if there's anything over there to offer like that you can offer me. And I eventually got sold on it, primarily because I actually came and visited. So like that same magic that we were kind of seeing in '06, I saw again in '07 when I came out here and realized like, one, that they were working on this really cool thing and that I could be a part of it, but also that there was this like network of other people that were working on it. And so I ended up in a building that got nicknamed the Y Scraper in North Beach. If you go, there's like a beautiful view and then like a very ugly 12-story building in the middle of it. Near Taylor and Lombard, and that's where we were staying. So they were furnished apartments, which meant that you could just move in and start working, and the landlords didn't check. So like it wasn't live work, but like that's what everybody was doing. So there were probably about 10 or 12 companies represented in the building, and probably like 5 or 7 of them were actually working out of their apartments. Let's see, notable names out of it. So Dropbox for sure. Discuss was on our floor. Etherpad, which became AppChat, which became Hackpad and Dropbox Paper, that whole lineage. Those guys started there. Also became Meteor and Apollo. Weebly.
Like Google Wave or something, right?
Yeah, Google Wave too, yeah. So that was one apartment, weirdly. Weebly was there, Justin TV was there, Zobni was there, academia.edu. I got to live with that guy, and I'm like, how did you get a .edu domain name? Like, just that, you should get funding for.
I never thought about that, actually. That's a good point. I get a lot of spam
legit.
from those guys.
Really?
Yeah, it's like, your publication's been connected. Anyway.
Yeah.
But I digress.
Congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
But yeah, it was just like this very high-density startup thing that I just got to move right into. So yeah, it was cool. A lot of people ask me, like, how did you know Dropbox is going to be $1 billion company? And I actually believe the opposite. One of my friends like came by the apartment once and was like, Aston, you gotta realize like Dropbox is gonna be amazing. You guys are gonna be $1 billion company. And I was just like, first off, you're off by like an order of magnitude at best. You could get like to 100 million. But then I was like, because I feel like betting is like an important thing. So I was like, I'll put my money where my mouth is. If we ever get to $1 billion, I'll give you $100, which
high stakes.
At the time, I didn't have any money.
Right, totally.
So but I was like, you know what? In retrospect, like that's a good hedge. Like if the company blows up, I can afford the bet.
Right. And if it doesn't do well, now you got a $300.
You can get a whole $100.
Right,
So anyway, I lost the bet.
Yeah, well, that's probably for the best.
It's okay. No, not whatsoever. Obviously,
I'd say it's worked out.
You have an L.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So let's fast forward a little bit, actually, because there's lots of interesting stuff you did at Dropbox. One of the things that I think is a difficult question to grapple with, especially I think when you start or when you're very early somewhere, is like leaving it.
Yeah.
And so talk us through a little bit kind of the process of like, how did you know when it was time to leave, and sort of emotionally, what was that like? Or like, was it a tough decision?
Yeah, it was tough and not tough at the same time. So
Sure.
I think like when I joined Dropbox, I joined with the expectation that because I was first employee, I was going to learn a ton about what it was like to run the company from this small stage, because like that was my aspiration. Like next step, I will be the founder, and I want to like see all the mistakes Drew and Arash make, and then like avoid them. And in some ways, by the way, Dropbox is very bad for that, because Dropbox like super worked. So most startups have like these ups and downs, and you don't know if you're gonna make it, and like it gets really tight. But Dropbox like pretty much like Drew wrote it all down, and it like proceeded almost exactly as he wrote. If you should like check out his application to YC. Yeah. It's kind of hilarious, like how well he saw the market, and like some of it is a little bit like off, especially timing. Like I think we thought we could build it faster than we did. But yeah, it kind of just proceeded really nicely, and so I actually didn't learn that many things about like early stage running a company, other than like hiring and like some of the scaling stuff. But no like, oh man, what do you do when you're out of money and all that. And so because I was going into it as like this learning thing, like I was like, okay, well, my lessons are going to run out after like 2 years. Like I just probably also the company was going to die because we had like Microsoft over here and like Ray Ozzie who spent his life on Sync. And then we had like Google over here who had been working on, like I saw screenshots from the Dropbox competitor while I was interning there. Like I know that it exists, and Apple is like, you know, their stuff kind of sucked, but like it's Apple, so you got to respect it. And like, so I figured something would happen. I would be gone in 2 years, and like 3.5 years in, I'm like, oh, it's 3.5 years in. Like I've been learning a ton the whole time, mostly about like engineering and product, and a little bit about like kind of small company stuff. I was like, oh, maybe, like, I don't know how long I can stick around here. It seems like I could stick around forever, but it seems like I should leave. Like I should, I don't know, my rate of knowledge about early stage stuff would be better elsewhere. And so anyway, like probably around then is when I started like wondering if I should leave, and then it took me quite a while from there. So I ended up staying at Dropbox for 4.5 years. And I think like by the time I left, I had mentally like figured out the next thing I wanted to do was start my company. And so it felt like opportunity cost every day that I was there in some ways. But it was really hard emotionally because I spent like every waking hour with these people for the first part of that journey. And the second part of the journey, the company was getting big enough that I just had like a very large network. And so I was gonna go from every day getting to work with my friends to every day sitting in front of my computer in my apartment.
By yourself?
Literally by myself, just like staring at a screen. I mean, it's a very different thing. And so I think I was a little bit afraid emotionally, but mostly I had gotten there logically of like, the only way for me to grow is to do something else.
Sure. And then the natural next thing for you, at least in your conception of it, was to start something new.
Totally, to start something new, to do YC, because that's what you're supposed to do.
Sure.
And I had an idea that I'd been like workshopping with friends for probably like 4 or 5 months before I quit. So I just like went full time on that idea. All right, have second, because it's gonna sound, I have to excuse myself. It's gonna sound like it's a joke, but this is for real. At the time, social mobile local was very hot. It was very hot. It was like you could just go to a VC and say social mobile local, and they would look at you the same way. Now, like, I don't even know what you could say now and have the same effect. Yeah. The way you could have said crypto a year ago.
Right, blockchain.
That sort of thing, yes.
Yeah, machine learning.
Yeah, where people are like, oh, tell me more. Yeah. And now it's a joke. But it's a joke for good reason. But like back then it felt real, and I was like, I have dialed this in. I have found a like perfect social mobile local idea. And that idea was basically like a social calendar, I guess you would say. So like stuff, hanging out with friends, nights and weekends. And in the process of building it, I was like, this is not the right thing for me to build. And I basically stopped midway through YC working on this idea and went into like a panic, outright panic. Because I was like, okay, that was the reason I left Dropbox. Like clearly I thought this was real. This is not real. Like I cannot build this app. It's not gonna work. By the way, no one else has built the app either. So like, if you guys are thinking about it, talk to me after about why not. Yeah, I kind of went into a panic, and I spent like a lot of time just trying to like figure out what I was going to do next. And it basically took me, so I did not do demo day, and then after that, it took me about 2 months or so to find like another idea I wanted to work on. That thing didn't feel right, and then it took me probably like another 6 or 7 months to like really commit to my next thing, which became kind of music tech stuff, which is what I still work on, and I also would not recommend other people work on. That's neither here nor there. I love it.
So do you tell us a little bit about, I mean, we talked about this previously, this idea of like founder market fit, and like how you decided to like start a new thing versus join a thing. I guess talk us through some of the calculus around kind of like what you decided to do next.
Yeah, so my perspective on founder market fit has changed a lot since college. I think, like, again, being a like kind of that early school acolyte of Paul Graham, I was very much a believer of like, well, I'm a talented person, and like I can build things, and anything that makes sense to me to build, I should build. And yeah, it'll be a company. Like, sure. Of course it'll be a company. And now I'm like so much more skeptical of it, to the point where it's like almost crippling. And I think there's some balance in the middle. But where I've landed on founder market fit is like, it's mostly about like knowing what you want first, and that's something that I really struggled with for a long time. So at this point, like now I have like a very clear framework, and I actually ask a lot of entrepreneurs, like when I first meet them, like I'll sit down in a meeting and they're like immediately pitching the company, and they'll be like, so what do you think? I'm like, all right, before I tell you what I think, let me ask you some questions. And essentially the questions I ask them are to figure out who they are and like what they want. And then from there, I can then say, okay, this company actually is not going to make you happy. So like my big 3 buckets are, one is power, one is kind of like, I guess, competition, sort of, kind of. And then the 3rd bucket is fame. And like with these 3 buckets, I think most people kind of primarily fall into one of them. And you can probably run almost any business with a predilection for one of the buckets. But if you pick the bucket and the company wrong, then it's like this continual fight. So like the number one thing I see, power people are people who want the world to be a certain way. And we talk about changing the world in Silicon Valley, but like if you actually just care about changing the world and you start a for-profit company, you may be in trouble. Because the market may not be interested in having its world changed, and like it's this like day-to-day fight. And like maybe those people should be politicians, or maybe they should be running nonprofits. If you are a competition person, I think like almost any business will work. And I'm like so envious of people who are competition people, because it's like literally you can drop them in like the the middle of a mass of people, and they will like rise to the top. For a lot of people, particularly in business, that's around like money, right? So it's like making the most money, not for the sake of having the money, but because it's like a really easy measuring stick. But there's like but there's like athletic competition as well. That's kind of that way. And then I am like very much a fame person, which not like Kardashian fame, although I think it's like the same thing. But it's like mostly about like other people's conception of you and you caring a lot about that, right? So like if I were to like say something mean to someone, I would feel bad, not so much because I had been mean and I like wish that I was not a mean person, but because then they wouldn't like me and I want them to like me. And I think that's the most complicated one to be as an entrepreneur, because so much of what you do in terms of building businesses is not directly related to like how people perceive you personally or like the things that you build. The closest to it for me is like product. And so like if I build a product that people really, really love, I kind of like, okay, that's great. Like this is like my thing. And it's one of the reasons why I think Dropbox was such a great company for me to work at, because we won that market on product alone. Like we had no clue how to market anything, and we had like not that much aspiration to like make as much money as we ended up making. We're just like, we're gonna make the best product ever, and everybody who used the product was like, oh, this is really cool, and that like made me feel good personally. And I think like Drew and Arash are oriented kind of similarly. And so yeah, I just now I'm like really careful, not just on the stuff that I like choose to join or like work on myself, but just in general, like the things I choose in life to engage in. It's like, I wanna make sure like this drives towards this like fame thing that I know is my underlying, and I know like this fame versus like competition versus like power thing sounds, I don't know, crude or I don't know, greedy somehow, but like that's like, I just see it as an underlying thing. So if like, I don't know, there's like an idea out there that I don't think would like contribute to my feelings about fame, I just like can't do it. I like really love this idea for a period of time where I was gonna like, oh, I should just like buy kids out of college. Like I should just like give them the money because like I can tell who's gonna be talented out of MIT or who's gonna be talented out of Stanford. But I'm like, however I set this up, man, people are gonna hate me. Because people are gonna say like, what are you trying to do? Like you're trying to create this privileged class. And they're like, I don't even know if this is actually happening, but this is like what's happening in my head. And I'm like, I can't run that company. So I just set it aside and then I like go to the next thing, so.
And so it sounds like the lesson, at least, we talked about this the other day, that it's like trying to be sort of intellectually honest with yourself about the underlying motivators for why you do what you do. And I think largely because like running a company kind of sucks. Like it's a lot of work, and it's just like, is that really, like, do you want to do it for the right reasons, or do you want to do it for reasons that are actually like sober about what's actually going to make you happy?
And totally, and I also think a lot of people spend like, they get caught up in the narratives they hear, and they think that they have to like follow one of those narratives, right? So it's like, oh, if I want to build the next great blah, 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 I need to be like super mission driven, which like may be true, but like for a lot of ideas, it's actually not. Like it might be better if you weren't. And so Yeah, I think like it's hard to know who you are. Maybe it's something that I learned as I got like older,
Sure.
but like I wish I had known it when I was like 22, or I wish I had known it when I was leaving Dropbox. To be honest, I would like skipped a lot of stuff that would have made me really like it didn't make me super happy to be working on.
And do you think like one of these causes a predisposition for starting versus joining, or like how does that interplay with the second question we've talked about a lot, which is like, do you start something, do you join something? Like how would you think about evaluating that decision?
Well, if you are a competition person or like particularly money driven, then I think you have to be like super dollars oriented. And to be honest, like joining stuff is way better from a dollar orientation perspective, so long as you come after a certain amount of risk has happened. Like, I don't know, you've been a founder before, like you can go years not making anything, even when the company's like doing pretty well. And so if you are like, if you know yourself to be the type of person who wants to be like well compensated and is gonna look out at other people like succeeding at a big company making like whatever the comp is, $500,000 a year, like maybe just go work at one of those big companies.
Sure.
And like I think it's like people are sometimes afraid. They're like, oh, I like came to the Valley to like be an entrepreneur. It's like maybe the thing that's most entrepreneurial is stack the cash and go start the thing afterwards.
Sure.
But I do think there's certain stuff you can't get if you're not the founder. And like if you are power oriented, if you like control, if you want the world to be a certain way, being a founder is a dream. Because like that's it all day, every day, right? And like the crazy part about it is the smaller the company, like the more power you have. Like there's almost something inversely correlated. Like if the company gets too big, you start to lose control of it. Like, I don't know, it just like blows my mind thinking about like Travis from Uber, who builds this huge company and then is like out of it. It's like crazy to think about. And you know, I don't know him, but like say he's this power-oriented guy, it's like it's almost worse. Like maybe you should have kept Uber small, you know, which is silly. But yeah, I think like again, I kind of go back to this like what's like most important thing to you. For me, in the moment where I was trying to decide like should I stay at Dropbox or leave, it was very much like I felt like I was going to learn more and like get more of the stuff that I cared about by like starting my own thing. And then after it didn't work, I was like, well, I guess I should join somebody. And I know it sounds a little bit like giving up, but it was actually me moving toward the stuff that was like going to make me happy. I will repeat again, economically, I actually think it's better to join than to start.
Yeah, depending on when you join.
There are a couple like
the EV is probably higher.
Yeah, especially nowadays. I mean, maybe macroeconomically things are better back in like 06, 07 for joining, where you could almost get paid the same thing at a startup versus at a big company. But at bigger companies now, or more established startups, even like, I don't know, the economics are quite good now. So I think if you want to start a company, you just need to like know why you're starting it and feel pretty good about it and know that economically it may not be the thing.
Sure.
And then the flip side of it, obviously, is if you really like windfalls, which is a category of the competition, like high variance is good, so then maybe you should actually start something. So
I think the thing that was, you know, I agree with about like 75% of the stuff you've said.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that you and I talked about this last time is I think like real intellectual honesty about what are the things that actually motivate you or make you happy, and then what are the paths that get there, even if they're not like the conventional path. And one thing we have talked about is you have this talk about like risk, and I think you had mentioned there was an audience where the theme of the talk, it was the same talk, but the theme was like you should be taking more risk.
Yeah.
And then that same talk to a different audience where you were basically like you should be taking far less risk. Like you should not be this risky. Like tell me a little bit about kind of the like preconceived narratives for folks and how you think that sort of biases what they end up deciding to do.
Yeah, so just to give a little more color on it, that talk was kind of this conception of like risk as a measurable quantity. My metaphor was like kind of a bank account, right? So the like more money you make, the more risk you can take, the like more credibility you have in your career, the more risk you can take, et cetera, et cetera. And so yeah, I gave this talk to at my like class reunion for like, this is like our 10-year reunion. And 10-year reunion MIT people are like very conservative, I feel like, on average, but happen to be super, super well like set up to take risk. And so I was like, guys, just do it. Like whatever you're doing now, just quit and go do something else. But then I also gave a talk to a group of people who were kind of newer to the Bay Area, but had come because they're like, I want to be the entrepreneur. I'm like, but you haven't been here long enough to like build up that like risk tolerance, and you have, you know, economic reasons why you probably shouldn't try. I think for this group, like maybe that's secondary. Obviously, like all of you have already kind of like tried to make that
path.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I hope you have your like risk equation like dialed in. But I do think I think it's an important thing to know that like entrepreneurship seems risky, but most of the people who are good entrepreneurs are not taking quite as much risk as it seems they are. And I think the best people, like if you have too much risk going on outside of your business, it like is a distraction. So I don't know, when I meet entrepreneurs, I like to see like really like well-privileged entrepreneurs who are like, nothing can stop me except the market. It's like, okay, that's cool. Like that's a bet worth like looking at. And the people who are like, well, I got like this, and this to take care of outside of my company. I'm like, you have to like put that aside and like handle that stuff first.
Because you think it just has to be about sort of singular focus.
Yeah, and because like I think there's just plenty of risk outside of the, like you should like make, I don't know, maybe this is me being extreme, but I try to like only have like one risky thing going on at a time. And sometimes that works out for me, sometimes it doesn't. But like, yeah, it's like there's that saying like only commit one crime at a time, which I think it's like, you know, like the more you stack, the kind of like worse your odds are that you're actually going to get away with it.
Sure. Interesting. Well, I feel like this is a nice segue to see if there are some questions in the audience.
Yes, please.
Can you speak more to this idea around fame and how that's kind of how you are and how that's affected the choices that you've made since leaving Dropbox and maybe led to more of your happiness? Because I feel like I'm like pretty similar, but maybe not something that I've like fully looked at in that same lens.
Yeah, so I'll finesse fame a little bit more because so like I think when I say the word fame, it's just like short, but it's like reputation based primarily, and like infamy for some people is like just as valuable as real fame, whereas for others it's not. For like academic people, like a lot of academic people are driven by fame in terms of like citations and like influence, things like that, like people playing with your ideas in their head. So yeah, I think like it took me a while for me to admit that I was oriented that way, because I'm not the type of fame where I want to be like on magazine covers or in front of cameras or whatever. And so I was like, I couldn't quite like dial in how it was, but once I like realized what it was like really powerful for me. Mostly because it just like encouraged me to do the stuff that I was like really enjoying. So like one of the things I really enjoy is meeting founders like one-on-one, just like learning about their business and hopefully like being helpful. And some people in the Bay Area do that because it's like a power thing, like there's an opportunity for them to like use that relationship to like make something else happen, and I am horrible at that. Some people use it as like a competition thing or like a way to like build wealth, because those are connections that will pay you off over time. I'm pretty sure that like most of the people I talk to, I don't like expect to get anything out of it. But for me, it is an opportunity for me to like build a relationship with the person where it's like very controlled, and I feel like maybe I can be helpful to them. And then when they come back to me and they're like, I remember when you said that one thing like 3 years ago, I'm like, yes. And then like I didn't do it, and I'm like, well, not the type of person I am. And so
Sure.
like I just don't even care if everything I say today, you guys are just like, you go home and like you remember that I said something, but you didn't like change your lives. Like that doesn't bother me. And so yeah, it sets like the context for like what are the conversations I want to have, what are the types of events I go to versus not go to. It definitely has set up like what type of companies I want to build, and it's framed. I'm like constantly thinking about, oh, maybe I should like do my own thing. It's framed the type of things that I would build versus I wouldn't build for sure. I don't know if that actually gets at everything you're asking, but it's a little more discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the things I think too is like, I think you're still sort of in the process of kind of like refining the words that really describe these.
Yeah.
In my mind, it's like, and because we spoke about this at length the other day, I feel like it's sort of about like orientation around, I think power is probably right, which is sort of like a direct, like the first one is kind of like direct impact on a thing happening or a thing not happening. And then the second one, I do like competition, where it's like, fine, like what is the axis on which you're scoring yourself? Is like, oh, is there some kind of game we're playing here, and am I making my number go up, or am I succeeding in some way? And the third, I think, is it's almost like reputation. It's like some combination of like reputation / respect, where it's like, oh, I want to do this because I want to be known as a person who like has smart things to say or that helps people or that whatever, which is like is quite distinct from I think those other two things.
Yeah.
I mean, you described how you went through OkCupid, which is like awesome company, right? Like the founders are pretty well known to coming here to Silicon Valley. And I think you as well, you started Zulip in Boston, and you guys have like different experiences in different cities and whatnot. Like, my question is like, how do you think like is Silicon Valley good indicator, or how is the area affected your business, right? Like Pilot, or for example Aston, how did it affect you in the long run, right? Like, do you think it was a good move, and overall how that changed both of you guys, right?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so we had two companies before Pilot. We had a company called Ksplice that we did in Cambridge that Oracle acquired, and we had another company called Zulip that Dropbox acquired, and we operated both those companies in Cambridge. And when Dropbox acquired Zulip, we all moved to here. And I think, when we were in Boston, everyone was like, you gotta move to Silicon Valley, like this is where it's all happening. You like can't even build a company in Boston. And at the time, I think I was like quite like averse to that notion. And my attitude was like, look, you smart people can build companies anywhere. I think that part is true. I think there are still, though, outsized benefits from being here, with a strong caveat. But I think it's like much easier to raise money here. I think to hire certain types of individuals, it's not easier to hire them, but they're more plentiful. And so in a sense, if you have the money to pay for them, it's easier to hire. Like, I think there are some structural things where if you are connected in the right networks, which both of us happen to be, that I think, yes, for us, there was a significant advantage in being in Silicon Valley. I think if we were doing Pilot in Boston, I think we would have struggled to raise the amount of money we raised, or to like hire the people we were trying to hire, or to gain the traction that we were trying to gain.
Yeah, I think Wasim kind of like knocked that out of the park. The only thing I add is to the point about talent, like because Dropbox had been rooted in Cambridge and the Boston area, like we definitely tapped that as it was almost a primary hiring spot. So we would like fly across the country twice a year, ask who the top students were, and just like give them all offers, and like built a lot of the early part of Dropbox that way. So like 100% there's talent elsewhere, and I think the fact that we were one of the only startups in Silicon Valley going back to MIT to recruit, and that we were homegrown, but that we were emphasizing that way, like helped us a lot. So I do think there's like something to be said for like people are everywhere for sure, and I also think you can build great companies wherever. But I don't know if my career would be anything like it was if I hadn't moved out here, and I think like it was only a matter of time before I would move out here. I think I would have only been in New York for 3 or 4 years max before I moved.
Yeah, I always sort of did feel there was like a when, not if.
Yeah.
For me personally, anyway. It's like, okay, well, when am I going to move to California?
Yeah. Also, New York at the time was a little weird because every time you like tell people you work at a startup, it was like next conversation. Like it just wasn't interesting. And like in Silicon Valley, if you tell people they work at a startup, they're like, okay, and tell me more. Which is like, I don't know. It's a bad thing and a good thing. But from the perspective of like trying to grow a career, I think it's a great thing.
Like, how much do you think was the idea, and how much do you think was the team, right? Like, as you recruit, like, recruiting is super important for a company, right? And how did, for example, in your experience, like, why did you think Drew was able to recruit so many good people, right? Like, I mean, clearly you are awesome, and like, I mean, the whole Dropbox team is very talented, right?
You're saying how much did the idea affect Dropbox specifically, or more generally with startups?
Both. And I mean, Dropbox specifically, and how did Drew recruit so many good people?
Yeah, well, I give my perspective on both, and then maybe Wasim will disagree on one or two of them. I think the idea was critical for Dropbox. To be totally honest, there were so many variations of what Dropbox was doing at the time that did not end up working, that it's like a miracle that Drew found the one. And I don't think it was accidental. I don't want to make it seem like, oh, he just picked an idea out of nowhere. He's just a really good kind of thinker in that way to find it. But I think the idea was critical. And I think if Dropbox had the wrong idea or ideas, it would not have worked. I don't think the idea, though, was why Dropbox was able to recruit. I think primarily Dropbox was able to recruit because it had really juicy technical problems. Once we explained it, on the surface, Dropbox seems simple, but once we explained it, people were like, oh, wow, there's a ton of depth in there. And we always had that thing that you just talked about, which debatable if it's actually true, but that idea that Dropbox has these really talented engineers at all times is actually really valuable for recruiting. You could go to MIT like we were going, and people would be like, well, where'd the best people from my class go? I guess they went to Dropbox. They must have really good engineers. I should go work there. And so it's this, it's kind of strength builds on strength.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think from my perspective, I definitely value team more than idea. I think so maybe this is where we disagree a little bit. I think the guardrails on idea sort of have to be that the market is large enough for the opportunity to be interesting. And I think if you don't have the idea exactly right, but you have a good team, you'll kind of pivot into the good idea in that market. If your idea fundamentally has a small market to it, I think it's hard to repair that even with an exceptional team. I think more commonly, though, what happens is you actually have a reasonable idea, but there's failure of execution, which is, I think, much, much more team-oriented, which is do you actually recognize that things are going well or going poorly, and are you sort of taking corrective action? Because even if you have the best idea, I think if you don't have the team that's sort of attuned to navigating it, you're not really going to get there. I kind of think the idea is sort of the easy part. I think this is maybe where we disagree.
I would tweak my claim. Well, I'm happy to disagree because it's just more fun. But I'll tweak mine a little bit to find some common ground, which is I actually think one of the differences is consumer versus B2B.
Sure.
Where I think B2B, a lot of the problems are a lot clearer. I couldn't today even describe to you what problem Dropbox solves. In the sense I can, I know the things people use it for, but if you ask me for a really crisp, what is the problem Dropbox solves that nobody else solves? I'd have been well, it only kind of works right now, and we're gonna make it really work, Versus I think, a lot of B2B things have much crisper kind of value propositions. So the consumer angle made Dropbox be the type of thing where I think the idea was maybe a little more important. And the execution was obviously very important because there were people who copied our idea and still did not get it right.
Right.
But yeah, I think there's a balance.
No, I think that's right. I think it was sort of new market versus existing market. And my world is much more the world of existing markets where the idea is arguably less important because you have some proof points in the market about people want to buy bookkeeping, people want to buy a chat product or whatever. Whereas you're making Snapchat, that's quite sensitive to the initial conditions. It's I don't know. I wouldn't know how to do that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to follow up on that. At least for me, it's work on Facebook. A famous example of a company or an idea had mostly terrible execution for a time, but eventually succeeded was Twitter with the farewell. With sales always down, stuff like that. How do you reconcile your beliefs with a case where execution was probably not great, the team I'm not going to speak for, but because the idea or because the need was there, it eventually ended up succeeding?
That's an interesting point. I think I would separate engineering execution from execution more broadly from a business perspective. And I think part of the realization, and I don't know that much about Twitter, was oh, we're making this platform that people are going to use in this interesting way, and we're going to do all this investing to get Shaq on Twitter and Marissa Mayer or whatever. I think they did that stuff in a very, very savvy way, in a very smart way. And actually, I like that you mentioned that because one of the things that for me is the most, and I'm curious to hear if you agree with this, one of the things that I think MIT does the worst, or just has the really does you a disservice on, is you leave MIT and you're like, yeah, if I build the best engineering solution, like we're going to do amazingly in the market. I just need to really like get the edge cases exactly right, and then we're just like totally going to succeed. And I sort of, my reaction to that is almost like no one actually cares about how good your engineering is. And I think like actually Twitter is a great example of that. I think like Facebook v0.1, like in PHP or whatever, is probably a great example of the fact that like no one cares that it didn't have eventual consistency, or I don't know. Like, the engineering actually turns out like can prevent you from succeeding in certain cases, but probably is not the thing that like makes or breaks the outcome of the company, with limited exception. Maybe like the dig rewrite, right? Or as an example of like,
that was bad product. That was bad product.
Yeah, fair enough.
I think the classic one is Friendster. That Friendster's engineering was so bad that the site crashed.
Sure.
But I don't even know if I believe that one.
Yeah. I mean, people have, well, in 2000, whenever this was, I think people had a lot of tolerance for crappy websites just because the bar wasn't that high.
Yeah.
Maybe now that's not the case.
So why did you choose to work on music?
Oh, that's cool. I love music. That's the short answer. So when I was a kid, some of my earliest memories are around computers, but my earliest memories are around music. Like my dad was in a band, and he would just like bring me to his band practice and just throw me on a beanbag couch. And the room's like, it's hard to get a scale given how big this room is. It was a very small room. All the instruments were like totally blasting. I had no earplugs. It's just like, we didn't know those things in the 80s.
Sure, it's different times.
And yeah, I just like love music. I'm a drummer. I play a bunch of other instruments as well. And I just dig it. That's a horrible reason to go into the business of something. So that's the reason why my startup search took so long, was because I had this thing that I really liked. And I talked to a few angels who were like, hey, what are you into? Like, maybe you should try to do something that you're really passionate about. And I resisted because I was like, there's no way that I should do something in music. Like, this is just like, it's fun for me. And so it should stay fun, and it shouldn't be the job. And there's something weird for me about making it my thing. But as I started looking at music, I realized how little I knew about how the music industry worked. And the more I learned about how the music industry worked, the more clearly I saw how technology could mediate some of the things that people actually wanted to happen. There's stuff that people are like, I wish you could do X, Y, Z. I wish you could do X, Y, Z. And it's like, well, someone should just come in and build that. And so I started getting super excited about it because I kept hearing these places for me to fit in. I think in retrospect, if I had been a little bit more money driven, I would have asked about the money first as opposed to asking about the money last. And I think, again, talk to me offline about the ways that music and money kind of fight each other. But yeah, in terms of being a space that appreciates good product, music is just in dire need. And there's a bunch of companies working on different pieces of it, on consumption, on discovery, on fan artist engagement, on marketing, all these different pieces. And there are people who just are almost allergic to this technology, and then there's all the new people. And that's the exciting thing is there are these kids who just didn't know anything but the internet, and they think everything they do is supposed to go through the internet. And so the company I work at now, United Masters, that's kind of where we specialize. We're building tools for those people who don't know that you're supposed to go to a record label. And that's super exciting for me. And I think I get geeked in general about learning stuff. Media is so different from this technology world that it was just fun every day that I could come in and wait, they do what? Why? I could just do a whole hour-long lecture on just copyright and how crazy it is and how it dictates all these different tech companies' business models. And so, yeah, it ended up being this really rich environment of stuff that I was passionate about, and eventually got me paid a little bit when I was doing my own stuff, and now I have a job doing it. So that's kind of how I landed on it.
Thank you, Wasim and Aston, for coming to speak to us.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.